Definitely. No, it's definitely.
We're going to walk all together, or you call us?
I'll call you, yeah.
Oh, it
No,
works
in
always.
France it doesn't.
It works for me. It works always. Not,
Yeah?
Good morning, everyone.
right, I guess.
Oh yeah. But
See
it
you later.
wasn't a good
Waiting to be
start.
seated.
Yes. Hi, I'm Julia Sattel.
I'm moderating the panel.
Very
You had a busy morning.
I guess the coffee was too good. Nice croissants. Hope you had a late.
We're all mic'd up. Graham, we'll sit here, okay?
Yes, I'll call you up.
He'll play the rock one of the group, okay? He'll be the one with the...
Ja hoor, heel goed. Hoi.
All right. Martin. It's not recording.
Okay, we're closing the doors, I think.
Process coming together.
Hoor je stem goed? Ja.
Okay.
Nothing to say.
Good morning, Excellencies, honored guests, dear colleagues and friends. Welcome to a third annual A4E Summit, and it's become a real pleasure for me to bring together the senior leadership of our members with the top policy makers and aviation industry leaders here in Brussels. For those who attended our gala dinner yesterday evening, I hope that you had a very good time and that you were inspired by our keynote speakers. Before I ask Willie Walsh to take the floor with his keynote address, I'd like to thank our media partner FlightGlobal for co-hosting and organizing this event with us once again. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, without whom such a day would not be possible, especially our platinum sponsor once again this year, Amadeus. Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to invite our 2018 Chair and CEO of IAG, Willie Walsh, to say a few words. Willie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased that you've joined us for our event today. It's now been 3 years since A4E was established. We came together because the industry voice was fragmented and we felt we weren't being properly heard, particularly here in Brussels. We needed to speak with one voice on key issues where we all agree. That was the objective then when we formed, and it remains the objective today. A4E started with the ambition to put air transport back at the heart of policy decision makers at the EU and at national level. We focus on uniting European passenger and cargo airlines to promote changes which increase competitiveness and result in lower fares, enhanced services and more choice for consumer. And while I believe we've done a very good job so far, and my congratulations to Thomas and the team for the excellent work that they're doing, it's clear that more progress is required. The airline industry supports over 12 million jobs in Europe and contributes around 635 billion euros to the EU economy annually. This equates to more than 4% of GDP. Aviation liberalisation has been the great success story across Europe. It has facilitated trade and connectivity between our nations, benefiting over 1 billion customers each year from lower fares, wider networks, better connections. And even if there is a no-deal Brexit, both the EU and the UK have confirmed that flights will continue. We believe it's in European consumers' interest to have a fully liberalised aviation agreement so that they can continue to benefit from the lower fares and choices that competition delivers. Europe's prosperity relies on the development of aviation sector and the continuation of liberalised arrangements across the continent. Airlines bring economic and social benefits to Europe. However, too many obstacles still exist and restrict our ability to unleash the full potential of the European aviation industry. Connectivity is critical, both within Europe and from the continent to the rest of the world. However, aviation capacity is constrained due to airspace inefficiencies and disruption caused by ATC, staff shortages and strikes. And let's call it for what it is: poor and inefficient management on the part of some ANSP units in Europe. European airspace archaic system is currently being pushed to what is an artificial and political limit. Last year, in the 3 peak months of June, July and August, the number of flights in European airspace increased by 3.8%. Delays in this period grew by 115%, and the average length of disruption increased by 192%. Some 61% of delays were caused by ATC staffing issues, 30% by weather and 9% as a result of strikes. In total, 334 million passengers were affected by delays and cancellations last year. That's a 26% increase on 2017. According to Eurocontrol, in total, in 2018, delays increased by 61%, with an economic cost of 17.6 billion, again up 28% versus 2017. And unfortunately, as those of you who attended the press conference this morning have heard, this summer is likely to be just as bad as last year. Now, we all know the reasons for this problem. European airspace is governed by complex and antiquated rules. Air traffic management is expensive, inefficient, and starved of proper resources and staffing. And in addition, the recurring strikes across Europe, particularly in France, only serve to make the structural problem worse. This continued industrial action is also bad for the environment. A recent study showed that ATC strikes, technical failures and operating inefficiencies wasted 81,000 tonnes of fuel, which produced an extra 254,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions per year since 2015. Now, this situation must change, and we're campaigning to ensure it's properly addressed by ATC operators, and we're pleased that the European Commission has responded positively to our calls for action. However, national governments must act to ensure that consumers don't suffer, and we urge the European Commission and Member States to take immediate action and implement EU's much-delayed Single European Sky. Now, improving and addressing the European airspace would bring many benefits. Its redesign into an integrated ATC system would mean shorter routings with quicker journeys and lower costs. And last year, the EU Transport Commissioner, Violeta Bulc, said that it would potentially generate 36 billion euros of savings over the next 20 years and deliver up to 11,000 jobs. It would also reduce the continent's airline emissions by redesigning its airspace. Europe could cut its emissions by 18 million tonnes of CO2 per year. In the meantime, the Commission should set the regulatory framework to establish a seamless European sky where countries use compatible technologies and standard procedures to work in a coordinated way across the continent. And this will deliver an efficient, cost-effective and environmentally friendly ATC service. The Single European Sky has been delayed for 18 years due to the opposition from some member states. Now, surely now is the time to put national self-interest aside, because the benefits for European citizens are enormous. In the last 10 years, while our airspace has become even more constrained, airport charges have, as a result, absolutely rocketed. They have more than doubled at the EU's top airports, with many of them showing profit margins far above the world average. And at the same time, as you know, airline fares within Europe have dropped by a significant percentage. Airlines operate under fierce competition every day, unlike airports. And this has driven the huge transformation to become more efficient and cost competitive within the airline industry. Even with rising airport charges, airlines' fares have gone down. However, on the flip side, the current system incentivizes airports to spend exorbitant amounts of money by airline customer standards. Airport charges should reflect operational costs rather than just boost the airport's profitability for the benefit of their shareholders. Passengers contribute to the airport's success, and therefore profits generated through commercial activities should be used to reduce aeronautical charges, making them more competitive and attracting more customers. Lower airport charges will mean lower average fares, benefiting both passengers and European economies. The current airport charge directive is not an effective regulation. It allows some airports to abuse their market power by charging monopoly prices to airline customers. Airport charges are a huge cost which airlines are obliged to pay but cannot effectively influence. The Airport Charges Directive must be amended to properly regulate the way these charges are set up to ensure that national authorities have the competence and the resources to effectively control airport costs. Efficient airport regulation is critical to stopping airports from ripping off passengers and enabling EU economies to fully benefit from aviation. Europe deserves cost-effective infrastructure, and airports have had it too good for too long. Another drain on European economic growth and jobs is aviation taxes. Countries which have scrapped them have seen a boom in air traffic benefiting their economies as a whole. A PwC study showed that abolishing aviation taxes would boost European GDP by 17 billion euros per year on average and create up to 110,000 jobs by 2030. There are plenty of examples of this. In 2014, Ireland abolished its aviation tax after passenger numbers fell 25% over the previous 4 years. And this resulted in an immediate traffic growth, with passengers today reaching record levels. And since the Austrian government halved its aviation tax last year, Vienna Airport has seen significant traffic growth, with more airlines operating there, and has significantly improved its competitiveness. Likewise, when the Netherlands scrapped its aviation tax 1 year after introducing it, because it was driving passengers away from the Netherlands, they saw an improvement in the situation. Now, although some governments claim these taxes help the environment, the truth is that they are revenue-raising tools that do absolutely nothing to reduce CO2 emissions, but serve to suppress business and tourism. And the UK's APD speaks volumes. The highest aviation levy worldwide was set up 25 years ago as a green tax, but not a single penny of the billions of pounds that have been raised through that tax has gone to environmental issues. Aviation taxes don't lower carbon emissions. Aviation taxes starve the industry of money that could be better invested in improving efficiency. And we are seeing an increasing number of European politicians calling for national or EU-wide carbon taxes. We expect the European Commission to make CORSIA the single global scheme for aviation in the long term. We believe this is the most effective mechanism for our industry to address its carbon emissions and should replace the EU scheme in 2021. CORSIA scope is a global response to a global challenge, and therefore it must be supported. We see this as one of the tools in addressing the long-term performance of the industry. In conclusion, Europe's prosperity relies in large measure on the continued development of its vibrant and competitive aviation sector. Airlines carry people, goods freely across Europe, which is the foundation of the European project. Airspace inefficiencies, air traffic control strikes, disproportionate airport charges, and high aviation taxes are all undermining the economic growth and job opportunities across the continent. We urge the EU to act and to tackle these issues which stifle our industry and our ability to boost economic efficiency in Europe. Our industry must address the challenges and adapt to the new demands so that everybody can benefit. But European governments must set the regulatory framework that enables our industry to prosper. And together, we can continue to bring significant economic and social benefits to European citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Willie, for these wise words and nicely summarizing our priorities going forward. You've just heard Willie's views on the importance of the sector and the top policy challenges that lie ahead of us. Yesterday at dinner, Michael O'Leary, our new A4E chair, also spoke about many of these, with a slight focus on the need for more airspace management efficiency. And Airbus leader Guillaume Faury, who was just there a minute ago, stressed mainly the need to invest in technology, but also really to work hard on sustainability and sustainability targets, which falls nicely into one of our policy targets and priorities. For today, ladies and gentlemen, I can promise you an exciting ride, so to speak, with many of our airline CEOs and guest speakers discussing what is needed in order to unleash the potential of the single aviation market. That would be in panel 1. That's the panel following my speech. After lunch, because we will serve you lunch, don't worry, we'll continue with showcasing the results of a recent study A4E commissioned demonstrating the environmental impact of an inefficiently run airspace and our industry's efforts to tackle emissions. Very important. On panel 3 then, we aim to demonstrate why aviation needs to become a top political priority for the next EU mandate, for the next Commission and Parliament, so that consumers can continue to reap the benefits of a safe, clean, efficient and reliable aviation sector. Unfortunately, Commissioner Walsh had to cancel her planned interview yesterday due to illness, but we are very grateful, I'm very grateful, that Eamon Brennan of Eurocontrol has agreed to step in and answer questions from Dan Michaels, who will be conducting the interview. And last but not least, it seems to have a tradition here that we close our conference with promises, with what promises, I think, to be another exciting A4E CEO debate hosted by CNN's own Richard Quest. Before we start, though, I'd like to share a brief film with you which introduces A4E's priorities and the issues we believe will stay top of our agenda here in Brussels for the next couple of years.
This is the beating heart of European aviation. Each day, millions of passengers and goods move quickly and securely across EU borders, supporting the development of economic networks which no other form of transport can provide. Consumers have reaped the benefits of this competitive aviation market with lower fares, more destinations and guaranteed overnight delivery options than ever before. Bold EU policies have paved the way for this success, making flying today more affordable and environmentally friendly. This powerful engine for EU tourism is projected to grow further, connecting more people, ideas and business. But this success story is in jeopardy. EU regulation simply hasn't kept pace with industry growth, creating recurring obstacles and inefficiencies which remain to be addressed, leaving airlines, their passengers and suppliers to absorb the consequences. European airlines are helping to define a future long-term vision for the sector, focused on the safe, efficient and sustainable movement of passengers and goods throughout the region. It is time politicians also played their part in ensuring this mobility is preserved. Airlines for Europe is the united voice of Europe's leading airlines in Brussels, representing over 70% of European air traffic. A4E works hard to ensure that decisions made here help travellers up there. Like keeping those airports which misuse their market power to charge airlines excessive fees in check, because the continued success of EU aviation relies on competitive airport services. That bottlenecks and disruptions caused by airspace fragmentation, air traffic control strikes and staff shortages are removed or kept to a minimum. The cost on Europe's economy is striking. Everyone would agree that this is one traffic jam the EU, its travellers and our planet could do without. But instead of fixing the issues at hand, quick fix solutions like green aviation taxes are proposed instead. Climate change knows no borders and requires a global effort. CORSIA, the United Nations Aviation Emissions Scheme, will offset 334 million tonnes of CO2 annually by 2035. Airlines have spent decades investing in research and development to make aviation more sustainable, because we know that the future of flying is painted green. A4E members want to be part of this future, with bold, sound policies to get us there, because a more connected Europe benefits the next generation of travellers and will determine our future success story. This is our vision for EU aviation. Welcome on board.
Okay, thank you. So, our vision for EU aviation. Why is it so important for us in the first place? Well, let me think about this if you talk to most analysts, they probably would agree that airlines have been doing quite well the last couple of years. But we are starting to see some warning signs in the market. Unfortunately, many smaller regional airlines have gone bankrupt. I'll just name a few: Primera Air, Germania, Flybe, and others, which have been impacted by the rising costs we're just discussing now, and which Willie mentioned before: airport charges, taxes, en route charges, which are too high, not efficient, and costs as a result of the disruption of traffic, both for passengers and cargo, by the way. The airlines are paying their suppliers more than ever for a service which, in many cases, keeps getting worse. And without the incentive to improve for these suppliers, the risk is that the service will simply continue to deteriorate. If you look at other sectors, this is simply not happening, and it's not acceptable if it is happening. I'm hopeful that this customer-supply relationship can still improve, because things cannot continue on their current course, obviously. Imagine what would happen if the fuel price goes up today, fuel which is now accounting for 35% of an airline total cost. Well, I wouldn't like to try to imagine it. The EU fought very hard for the single aviation market, and we cannot allow monopolies or political bottlenecks to hinder the progress airlines have made in achieving this competitive market, which we have today, with lower fares, more choices for passengers. Let's make sure that the European consumers can continue to enjoy a good service at an affordable price. And to close my remarks, I'd like to make A4E's future priorities crystal clear. We are urging you, not all of you in the room, but of course also those key stakeholders and decision makers who could not make it today, but who have a real influence in Brussels and in the capitals, to jointly make aviation a top priority for the next EU mandate. Looking ahead towards the next European Parliament and the Commission term, A4E hereby invites the candidates and political groups to support our call for action. The call for the future of air travel in Europe is available on our A4E website. And with that, I leave it up to the moderator to call for the next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. Okay, my name's Graham Dunn. I'm from I'm the editor of FlightGlobal's premium news service. I'll be moderating this next session. Before I bring our panel on, it's a bit of housekeeping, and I guess Slido. Hopefully, you guys are familiar with this already. This is the way for you. One of the ways that you can take part and make the session more interactive. So we use this as a way for people to log questions, either as they think about them, or because they want to do it anonymously, or it's just easier. We will obviously still accept old school questions, the old school method of having your hands up, and we also use the format as a way to carry out some polls to get some of your input into it. And there will be a poll in this forthcoming session. So if you haven't already, and I'm sure there's no one in the room who hasn't already logged onto the Wi-Fi, but log onto the Wi-Fi, which is A4E, the password is Brussels. If you could go to slido.com and enter the event code, which is A4E Summit, and then you can just log your questions, not only for this panel, but for all the panels that follow. And whilst you're all doing that, I'll invite our panelists up to join me on stage. Excellent. Okay, so hopefully you can carry on logging on, but you'll be able to, you're all up to speed on that. So I've been joined by an illustrious panel. So we've got 3 airline CEOs joining us from KLM. You've already seen them this morning, Pieter Elbers, and from airBaltic, Martin Gauss, and from Volotea, Carlos Muñoz, and in between from Amadeus, President of Airlines, Julia Sattel. And the theme of this session is really to look at, I suppose, the issues that affect EU carriers' effectiveness and competitiveness, and also, you know, not only logging those issues, but looking at how carriers have transformed their business to try and retain that competitiveness in a changing market. And I think one of the interesting factors we have is we have carriers from, very different sectors, and no one issue necessarily affects the same carrier. So I'd just like to begin by way of a introduction, I guess, looking at some of the specific factors. So Martin at airBaltic, I mean, over the last 4 or 5 years, that's a market that has changed a tremendous amount. You've seen players leave the market, opportunities there. How has that market changed? How have you had to evolve the airline to retain competitiveness?
We remain competitive by having found a model which is still unique, because we have a full business class in the front, and then with the curtain have an ultra low cost economy class, which is today's trend, that you fly ultra low cost. So we offer both on one plane, and in addition to that we fly a hub and spoke model, that taking away the seasonality a little bit, because half of our traffic in Riga is transferring. So with that we have found a model which in the last years was enabling us to grow and grow profitable now the 6th year in a row. And we continue doing this because we see, even if airlines are leaving the field around us, that we can benefit from it and still grow.
And have low-cost carriers affected that market and what customers expect?
No, low cost, of course, is driving all of this, because there's more passengers, more price sensitive. That's why we are offering an ultra low cost cabin in the back, and the pricing. So you have a very cheap ticket price, and then you add what you want to have. But at the same time, we see the demand for a business class. And with that, we offer a very good business class, and both together work with us. It's probably a unique concept at the moment, but we see a growing demand, and that's why we can continue doing what we do. In addition, we had to invest in more modern aircraft. We fly the most modern A220 now, and we will be transferring the whole fleet to that aircraft type.
And presumably that's how, because we've heard a lot and we'll hear about the costs that airlines can't control, but fleet is presumably one of the things you are able to control to get those costs down.
The reason for investing into this aircraft was that it comes with a significant cost saving on the fuel side. We have the aircraft now for 2 years in operation, and it saves up to 24% against the existing jet. And we recently took a decision ahead of the plan to phase out the older aircraft earlier. So we will be stopping flying our Boeings earlier, because the aircraft is so efficient on the fuel saving. So that is helping us, and it's a pure cash saving. Each time that new aircraft takes off, we are saving cash against flying with the other jet.
And Carlos, Volotea, probably the newest airline in the panel, although not that new, I guess, but with a very specific model, isn't it? You've been targeting, I suppose, underserved markets.
We have, excuse me, good morning. We have indeed. I do think we're the youngest airline in Europe, probably, of any size. I don't think this decade the European Union actually favors more competition, and they want to favor new entrants. And I do think, I'm not saying this particularly proud, I wish I couldn't say it, but I don't think this decade, other than Volotea, there's been, many other airlines starting in Europe, frankly, for whatever reason. I'm sure ATC and everything has got to do with that. In our case, yeah, we do look at it from a very, let's say, niche perspective, Graham, where we have got, basically, you could say, I think probably everybody in this room knows and agrees, 3 big trends. Let's say one is, people always want to travel more. You've had, in particular, just to give you a figure, in intra-European travel, we've grown 3.7 times GDP for the last 15 years. So it is, huge. Dynamic sector. Second, like Martin was pointing to, I think it's a big part, price driven and low cost part of the industry. When I started in this industry back in 2002-03, share of low cost was like 8%. Last year it's almost at 50. So it's quite. And everybody, by the way, legacy or low cost, we've all had to adapt to that. Let's call it competitive pricing, whatever you are. And then the third, which is the most particular to Volotea, and I will push our own angle, is I see people, as in long haul, in short haul too, wanting to fly point to point. People don't want to connect unless they are really forced to, because there is no point to point connection. And basically what our company does, and it's still again pretty young, we're now only 7 years old, but in the last 7 years, or if you want rather, as of today, we have 320 routes, of which 200 did not exist when we first launched. So we actually are putting together many points across all of continental Europe, and that's what I think people want to do, and it's actually greener also. Instead of 2 flights, you're doing just one point to point, and again, it's just another good example of, I think, how dynamic and competitive and often imaginative this industry is.
And starting those new routes, how important is a kind of low fares to making them happen? I mean, if you're the only operator on the route, can you do you have to charge low fares, or?
I think the way you're asking, you'd sort of suggest no, because you're the only one, but the reality is that you have to stimulate traffic a lot, not only wanting to travel, but because the markets are smaller, you do need to go with prices that are, actually our starting price is very typical in low cost are €9, and our average fare is actually €38. So, we'll talk later, I'm sure, about ATC and around EU 261, but if you sell tickets at €38, and ATC causes a delay, and you've got to look after that passenger, which we like looking after our passengers, and often, if it's not deemed extraordinary, you've got to pay €250. Compare that with 38. You get, that's the less pretty part of our industry. I think we've got a lot of good things, and I think it's in pretty good shape. Personally, I'm pretty healthy, but we've got those challenges that we've kept on hitting during the morning, and we'll talk more during the rest of the day.
And we go from one of the youngest airlines to one of the oldest airlines, I guess. I thought I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. No, I'm not disappointing you by saying that, right?
So for KLM, an established network carrier, I mean, obviously you felt the competition of low-cost carriers, all sorts of pressures over the last 4 or 5 years. How's KLM evolved, and how's it had to adapt?
Yeah, well, you're perfectly right there, and being a young carrier like Carlos with 7 years of history, it's a bit of a different challenge we had at hand. Our business model has remained pretty much the same in terms of building a great network with optimal connectivity. 2 out of 3 customers on our network is connecting, and in fact, by connecting Europe to the rest of the world, we're fulfilling a function here by connecting a lot of smaller communities in Europe through our hub, basically to the world. And I think one of the points which was also addressed in the speech of Thomas earlier, the economic relevance and the jobs we provide with aviation from that perspective in Europe is just enormous. What we have done at KLM for the last couple of years, we have embarked on a rather ambitious program of cost reduction on the one hand side, and significantly investing on the other hand side. And we've invested a lot in new fleet, digitization, making sure that all our processes, with all that legacy we carry normally, has been changed, and to make sure that we live up to the customer expectations which are required today.
And how far through that digital journey do you think you are? Is that
Well, I usually make internally a sort of distinction between what we do to our customers and what we do internally. And at KLM, I think traditionally we have been pretty advanced when it comes to all the interactions with our customers in social media, and we've embarked really a philosophy and a strategy where we want to be where our customers are. That's why we moved with WhatsApp, that's why we moved with WeChat, that's why we moved with all these social media platforms. Where we were lacking behind, to my view, was a lot of the internal procedures and the internal processes, which were sort of just carried on from the old days. And we are rapidly changing that, and that's providing a lot of energy and a lot of dynamics and a lot of cost cutting really into the company.
Excellent. And Julia, obviously you get to see a whole variety of airlines, a whole variety of models, and in particular, I guess, the digital side of it and customer side of it. How have you seen airlines changing and requirements changing?
Right. I mean, we are serving more than 205 airlines worldwide. Yes, we see across the world, but the change is that technology is evolving. So technology allows to do what needs to be done. Consumer expectations are changing. Their shopping experience on the internet is driven by other industries like retail. So they expect the same when they buy travel. And they expect frictionless travel. That means no baggage loss, no delays, no disruptions. So it's the opposite of all that I've been hearing. The airlines are evolving accordingly by more focus on the end consumer, more personalization. They are evolving their distribution strategy, and that is twofold. There is cost and efficiency opportunity for them, and also additional revenue opportunity. Technology is needed for that, but they are also focusing on getting better on their operational performance to deliver that better experience to the end consumer. And our role in that is to deliver technology that makes that possible, like disruption management, like tools at the airport that make even diminish delays through better schedule planning, using machine learning to make things better. So I think we have a role to play in that transformation of airlines, and clearly the end consumer is expecting us. You are not competitive if we are not complying with latest technology.
Thank you. So, talking of technology, we are about to attempt some technology here with the a poll that we have lined up in Slido. So you should be getting the details of it on the screen in a moment. We're obviously talking about competitiveness for airlines and a number of the issues that affect airlines' ability to do that. So there's a poll here. We want everyone to give this a go. I will ask the panelists more detailed on this afterwards. But what are the biggest challenges to airlines' competitiveness? Ill-fitted legislation, increasing external costs, evolving consumer trends, rising taxes, which you've heard a lot of this morning, airspace capacity. So we have the votes go, oh, this is exciting. This is like election night or Brexit night, if we're allowed to just mention that. I don't think I am. We'll keep going for a little bit longer. It's good stuff. A few more. There was another option on there, which was other, which I'm glad we haven't had too many else, otherwise this would go on for... So we'll keep those going in. It looks to me as one of the top priorities there is ill-fitted legislation. Anybody on the panel think, is that something that would you'd see as a top priority?
Well, I think we would recognize the entire list, in fact. And the airspace capacity was already mentioned this morning, but speaking with someone, the example, if you go to the movies or if you go to a restaurant and the road towards the movies, you spend like 30 minutes waiting for traffic lights or non-adequate capacity of the roads. And you arrive at the movies and you just enjoy your time, or you miss the movies. No one would sort of sue the theater. Well, the reality, yeah, you laugh, but the reality in aviation, and that sort of combines the first 2 points, if we see what's happening in the airspace capacity and some of the delays we heard this morning and the enormous effect it has on the operation, it clearly demonstrates that we both have ill-fitted legislation when it comes to EU 261 and the lack of any serious revision in that, and secondly, the combination with the airspace capacity, which is absolutely inadequate or inadequately managed when it comes to dealing with the demand.
And I think with EU 261, I mean, Volotea is in a slightly, because you're the only operator on a number of routes, does that create additional challenges for you?
It does indeed, Graham. I was actually going to jump on the airspace capacity, but
no,
that's fine. But since you've asked me, I'll go on 261. Yeah, 261. You know, I think everybody. We're in a continent that is consumer-oriented. I think that's a great thing of Europe. I think, you know, we as an association favor that a lot. At the same time, you do want some fairness and some clarity. And again, the biggest issue here is that we pay for things that we're not responsible for. And I think it was Michael Reynaert that touched on it earlier. That, you know, there is, you know, again, the ATMs, which are the ones causing in January. It's a January statistic, 90% of the delays. During the year, it remains a pretty high percentage, all the same. They're not responsible for anything. So I think we're all in favor of making sure that, using Peter's metaphor there, that the lights work and that you don't take 30 minutes to get to the movie center. But if it's again, it's following on that analogy, it's like the municipality would be responsible, but I'm the movie owner, I'm paying for that delay. It doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to me. And to your specific question, in the case of Volotea, the more dispersed you are and the thinner the frequencies, which in our case you've got that, it makes it more difficult. If you have, I don't know how many Paris, Amsterdams Peter has got per day, I'm going to
40.
assume 40. Well, he can shift that a little bit easier, let's say, if I can say that, anything affecting than, perhaps what we can do going from Venice to Pantelleria twice weekly. Pantelleria is a small island of the south of Sicily, just to give you that example. But I'll jump if I can. I think on that poll, if I could vote, I could have voted for airspace capacity, if I'm not disrupting your order, Graham. But I think, I'll just repeat, because again, it's a couple of things. One is some of the data used before that we've been discussing this morning, also in the closed session, and it is just mind-blowing figures that I think it's pretty effective to repeat. Right? It's traffic grew 14% the last 4 years. Last year, delays 280%, which is brutal. Eurocontrol, I think, Enan is speaking later. We had last year 334 million people affected by this. And like we're pointing out, I'll give you one thing of Volotea, and then just a hint of, again, solution, which is what we want to push. In the case of Volotea, small carrier, we had I have our COO here, two years ago, actually three, in 16, we had 10% of our summer flights delayed by ATC. We thought that was sort of pretty bad. Then in 17, it increased to 20%. And then last year it jumped to 30, which is like, so I don't want to conclude that simple linear trend saying it's going to be 40. I hope not. I think, we're all trying to do all we can. And again, just to emphasize and to sound more constructive, it actually is a simple solution. That's what we're saying. It's, at the end of the day, this is literally hundreds, maximum tens of people in 2 or 3 big air traffic control centers. So I think if there would be the political will, to help, hundreds of millions of passengers being stranded, having very bad experience, I think it could be a relatively easy fix.
And Martin, which of those categories would you have thought as the most significant?
The same, as my colleague said. The external factors, the air traffic situation is a challenge for us, for smaller airlines, and we saw some airlines going out of the market because they just couldn't pay any more the compensation of 261. And in one case that was stated by the airline that they went out of business. I think they both said it, that these are the challenges we have. I think we do very well our job. We're investing in new aircraft, we are opening new destinations, we are reducing the ticket prices, we're offering high technology when somebody wants to book a ticket. More and more airlines introducing Wi-Fi on board. So we do all the things we can do as airlines, but unfortunately we cannot do anything about an airspace structure or airspace system because we are using it, and if it is not reformed, then the passengers will suffer and we suffer at the airlines.
And another one that was on the list, which I don't know, can you do anything about it? Rising taxes, is that something that you are able to address? Peter, I guess it's especially with developments in the Netherlands recently around.
Yeah, well, Willie in his great speech referred to a decision which was made by the Dutch government a couple of years ago by introducing local ticket tax, and the effect of it was great. Because people would jump in a car, drive for an hour and a half to Belgium or Germany and just take a flight from there. So the effect on the local economy was terrible, and in fact it didn't do any good for the environment. In fact it did the contrary, because people would just avoid by paying it by driving up with the car somewhere else. So I think our plea here is really to go for a global system which is in place, a system which really helps to address the environment rather than just another taxation. And I think it's a sort of repeating theme as we mentioned it this morning. Making the airline industry more environmental friendly is something we would all support and we would all endorse. And I think the airlines should take their responsibility in that, and we are doing that as individual airlines and as a sort of A4E conglomerate. But yet, just adding taxes isn't a solution.
Yeah, and do you think that message is getting across? Because taxes, or is that always going to be, is it sector that governments will always in one form or another think is taxable?
Well, the brutal reality is that we're having this discussion, and there's quite a few countries where this is on the table. And again, some introduce it and change it quickly after. Some, even before introduction, realize that this is not the best way forward and do something else. And the fact that we're discussing means that so far we are not yet effective enough in bringing that message across and sort of demonstrating that all the efforts we are doing are really paying off in terms of reductions in CO2 emissions per passenger. Because we do collectively as airlines have made really big steps there, together of course with the OEMs in moving forward.
Yeah. And Julia, what would...
I think I recognize that all of the challenges need to be addressed. There's not one that alone will be the big solution. And I think the great mission of this Airlines for Europe Association is to help addressing a few of them. That's the way to lobby, to push until it changes. But there's also areas, not to get depressed, where there can be effective change done through technology. When we talk about disruptions, a flight cancellation, and we work together with Swiss there, of a plane with 100 passengers, to deal with that took 3 to 4 hours in the past. Now it takes 2 to 3 minutes to notify passengers, get them a new boarding pass, and reaccommodate them. That at least helps to make the passenger experience not as miserable as it could be. And so there is things that can be done while pushing all the other stuff. But I think an airline has to use technology, standard technology, as much as possible to smoothen the customer pain points, because in the end, it's the end user who decides what he or she does, whether they drive, they fly, and which airline they choose, and they will choose the one that offers them the smoothest experience.
Martin, at airBaltic, for example, using technology in that kind of way, or looking to develop technology to tackle some of these issues?
Exactly what was said. We're a customer of Amadeus as well. So we're using these kind of technologies, and we're constantly, and I think airlines are always drivers to come up with new technologies, with innovation, and all of us do, because the customers have the choice with whom they fly, and there's a big selection out there. So all airlines try, of course, to improve their product, and we're very strong KLM leading on the social media front. So in any channel today, as an airline passenger, you find what you want to look for, and every year airlines improving, and we're an industry where a lot of money is spent on improving the customer experience, not only when on the ground, but also in the air, new technologies coming there. So I think we do that because passengers continue booking us, passengers enjoy flying on airlines. It's a very positive industry, a lot of positive emotions when passengers can travel, and we do our part. And it is what we're discussing today again and again, is the stuff which is not working. But in general, I think everybody's very happy that we as airlines are doing a good job and making life a lot better for the passengers using us.
And Carlos, Volotea, is technology key for you guys?
Couldn't be otherwise, right? It's again, we're looking at the trends. There are more taxes, there is more issues on the one hand, and always very competitive industry, whatever the strategy of each company. And the fares have gone down 20%. In real terms, right? I think before it said 11% in nominal, 20% in real terms over the last 10 years. Technology is one of those levers that you have got to use, I think, to be able to balance the equation. And on top of that, I think the industry as a whole is doing pretty well from a financial viewpoint, right? It's like healthy years, shall we say, for airlines, which, as probably almost everybody in this room knows, has not been the history of our industry, but the last 10 years or so have been an amazing exception. In our specific case, let me not at all, I mean, we're a small airline, so I'm sure there are a lot of things, a lot of people, out there doing bigger, greater things than what we do. But I'll give you our perspective since you asked me. We see much more development. We're using very heavily technology and big data and machine learning, which are amazing, more on the commercial side of things and the client experience in terms of how they buy, what they expect to see, which very heavily around ancillary products. That's a big part of low cost in the industry recently, which products people do want to buy many more things than what they thought they might want to at the beginning. It's interesting, half of in our client base, half will actually buy a lot of other things, and it's a pretty good way to complement that low fare that you must have for people who only want to buy the ticket. And perhaps I see a lot of potential, but in our case still a little reality on the operational side. I think, again, how we bring big data, on things like the disruption, for example. I think it can be much more on scenario planning. I think on maintenance, for example, you have, not to applaud them, but we believe a lot in what Skywise is doing, for example, with everything to do going forward in being able to run maintenance in a more effective way. So I think there is, ample room for improvement further there, and I think the whole industry will keep on using more technology and Volotea as part of it.
Excellent. So I don't want to eat too much into lunch, so we might go to some of the questions that have been generated. Thanks for people for posting. We'll start with that top one. What is the view of the panelists of the challenge of airport privatizations across Europe by being used by governments as a cash-generating tool? Does anybody have a view towards this?
Well, it's more a statement than a question, right? And I think from at the end of the day, you pay for a service, and Willie Walsh was in his speech also referring to some of the excessive fees at airports. And clearly there should be a correlation between the service you buy, like for an airline, and the price you pay for that. So the moment that the privatization is driven indeed as a cash-generating tool, obviously, at the end of the day, it's not benefiting the consumers, because the consumers eventually end up paying with that. So I think from our perspective, we would see that as a very serious risk and threat going forward. Especially, I think, privatization, when there's real competition, it could help, but in many cases there's no real competition between airports, just monopolies, which needs to be managed in a way which does justice to, at the end of the day, the interests of the consumers.
I'll take, if you want, the second one. That's how you want to move
so
it,
the
Graham.
second question, the need for reform of EU 261 is obvious, but the European Parliament tends to side with consumers. Can you be sure you get the reform you want?
My take on that is we side with consumers ourselves. It's really, I think, no straight thinking CEO of an airline, I don't think will think, that it's not his or her number one priority. I do think that there are a couple of areas there where I think Parliament hopefully can, at least consider our viewpoint. One is, again, who is responsible for it, and, again, everything we've discussed on ATC. Also the time of it, the 3 hours versus 5 hours. Can you propose a realistic solution in 3 hours? We do not think so. And then last, there is a whole industry raising that it's, in my opinion, pretty unhealthy, because it's out of a need to protect the consumer, which we all agree with. There is this intermediate, I think Americans call it ambulance chasers, which is something that, again, I think hopefully we get the Parliament to at least consider and agree with some of those viewpoints.
May I add to it? 261 was there so that customers are protected, and the whole discussion is like airlines are doing everything wrong. I think we do a lot of things right, and if we do something wrong, we don't have a problem that we have to follow that. I think the big discussion is about what is out of our hands, and it's not to protect the customers. We are fully behind it, but it's just unique to our industry. It's not happening to any other industry this way, and it is completely unfair what at the moment we have to compensate, which has nothing to do with the airlines. But I have to say that we as airlines are very happy to do the best job with the customers, and we will continue to do that. So that on 261, because this discussion looks like we airlines are doing everything wrong. Actually, we're doing a lot of things very well and very good, but that is something where the law is just not made good enough.
But for years there's been very little clarity around that regulation, I guess. how can you be optimistic things will change, or that clarity will come, and that it might come to?
Like today, by talking about it, because I think the customers do not know what is going on. Yeah? If you are sitting on a ferry and there's a storm, nobody wants to go out on that ferry on the ocean because they're all scared. In our case, the passengers at the other end would not know that we couldn't depart, but then still we are responsible for it. So sometimes it's communication, and I think if we are communicating as we do today, that it's completely out of our hand if a air traffic sector in Germany is not doing its job. The communication about it maybe will bring politicians but also the customers to the point that they say, yeah, that is not fair. And I think that's the point we need to make, and it's communication about it.
I saw a question for me that disappeared, but
yes.
I'm happy. I'm not shying away to say that much regarding the EU probing some of our clauses to airlines. First of all, that's a discussion I think we are having, so I can't anticipate here all the arguments, but you can only know the principle is always logic prevails, competition prevails, so we are in a competitive environment, and I think we stand up with fair and logical arguments to everything that is probed. So it's very important for me that you know we don't shy away from that discussion.
And I'm very impressed you didn't shy away. There is I've got a message saying time is up. Yet you still answered it, which is very good of you, because you had
don't think I hide away
you could have just
from
sort of
maybe the touchy point. So that's.
We could carry on debating this for hours, but we do have lunch. We have other sessions. I know, especially around airspace connectivity, that issue will be debated in some depth afterwards. I'm sure you guys will be happy to take questions around the lunch and so forth. But thank you everyone for your contribution as part of this panel, and thank you to my panelists.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We should